Hey there gardeners, welcome back to my channel. Today I've got something really exciting to share with you. A complete guide on how to grow Papalo from seed all the way to harvest. You're probably wondering, what is Papalo? It's a common herb in South America. It tastes very similar to cilantro, but doesn't give you that soapy flavor like some people get when they eat cilantro. Not only is Papalo a great cilantro substitute, but it thrives in the middle of my super hot Florida summer. Thus why it's also called summer cilantro. It's one of the few herbs that can grow in very high temperatures above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. I absolutely love cilantro, but unfortunately I can only grow it during my fall and wintertime here in Florida because it does not grow well in high heat situations. So I grow Papalo instead. This is one of my many Papalo plants that I have growing around my garden. It's pretty mature at this point. It is loaded with seeds, but it has provided me with tons of these delicate, fragrant, and flavorful leaves that I could use as a garnish on lots of my favorite food items. Alright, so I'm going to teach you how to grow it from seed. If you need seeds, they are kind of hard to find, but I do have some on my website. First, I would like to share some information and history about this wonderful herb. Papalo is a very common herb in South America, in particular Mexico, where it's used in lots of its cuisine. My family's from the Dominican Republic, so we are more of Caribbean descent, and our food is completely different than the food that comes from South America. So if you're from South America and you know all about this plant, how to use it, please share some of your recipes. I would really appreciate it. The name Papalo comes from this Aztec word, which means butterfly. It also goes by these names as well. Papalo predates the introduction of cilantro to Mexico by several thousand years. It's thought to have originated in South America, whereas cilantro was introduced to South America by the Spanish conquistadors. And cilantro is native to parts of Asia and Europe. Interestingly, Papalo does grow wild in some parts of the United States, like Arizona, New Mexico, and parts of West Texas. But it's a little bit of a hidden secret because not a lot of the locals know what this is. Alright, so let's dive into growing Papalo from seed. Papalo loves warmth, so plant these seeds in the spring after all danger of frost has passed and when the soil is warm enough, at least 70 degrees Fahrenheit or above. These seeds will not germinate well in cold soil. If you have a long, warm growing season, like gardeners in zones 8 and up, you can direct sow the seeds after all danger of frost has passed. Find a spot that gets full sun, is free of weeds, and has well-draining soil rich in organic matter. Plants get pretty big, about 3 feet tall by 3 feet wide, so give them some space. To direct sow the seeds, find a bare spot in your garden that has some nice loose soil and that gets full sun. That's very important. Use a little hand rake to gently scratch up the first inch or two of soil. Anytime that I'm direct sowing seed for leafy greens or things that I'm growing to eat the leaves, I like to sprinkle in a lot of blood meal over the area. Blood meal is an organic fertilizer, very high in nitrogen, and it promotes lots of lush leafy green growth. Gently rake in the blood meal into the top few inches of soil. Then take your Papalo seeds and sprinkle them lightly over the soil surface. Use a rake to rake them in. I don't like to bury them too deep because that will prevent proper germination. Pat the soil down so the leaves make contact with the soil and then keep the area well watered to aid in germination. Now here is the most important thing about sowing Papalo seeds. They naturally have low germination rates. I find that I get better germination when I do not cover these seeds with much soil and if they are exposed to bright light. Some seeds require light to germinate. This shouldn't be an issue if you planted them in a spot that gets full sun. You could also sow the seeds indoors to get a head start on your Papalo harvest, which is my preferred method because I can control the conditions to get better germination. Start them about 8 weeks before your target date of transplanting them into the garden. Using my garden as an example, my last average spring frost date is about the 2nd week of February, so I'm going to backtrack 8 weeks from there and start sowing my seeds indoors. Just take out some of the seeds and then sprinkle it pretty densely over the top of the surface. I say densely because Papalo doesn't have great germination, so you just want to make sure a couple of them sprout. Gently move around the soil to kind of partially cover the seeds. You do not want to plant them too deep, more like scratch them into the soil and then press down so those seeds get locked in place. It's okay if some of them are not covered by soil, just make sure they're locked in place so the wind or something doesn't blow them out. Then water this in, keep the soil nice and moist so that they'll germinate quickly. Some seeds like chamomile or ground cherries actually require light to germinate, and I have a feeling that Papalo is pretty much the same. So place this pot under some strong light, whether that be grow lights or maybe even shop lights. Just make sure that they are 5,000 kelvins or above for the daylight range. If your weather is nice outside, then you can put this under some direct sun, but again, they do not like the cold whatsoever. Since they germinate better with warm soil, It's also beneficial if you just put this right on top of a heat mat. Once these seedlings are about 4 inches tall, it's totally okay to transplant them. Add some blood meal into the planting hole to promote that lush leafy green growth. Just to recap, so you get the best germination possible, Papalo needs 1. Warm soil. 2. Barely cover the seeds with soil, just lightly scratch them in. 3. Expose the seeds to bright light. And 4. Keep the soil moist to help with germination. So now that your plants are growing in your garden, let's talk about general plant care tips. Papalo does not like dry soils, just monitor the soil level. You want it to be consistently moist, but not overwater it. If you notice that the leaves are all of a sudden starting to turn yellow, you're probably overwatering. This does survive here in my very hot summer, but it has a tendency to wilt in the hottest parts of the day. To help out with that, it's very beneficial if you just give it a little bit of water early in the morning. That way it has that water moisture in the soil available for the hottest part of the day when it's really struggling. You don't really need to fertilize it. It's not like your other crops that really benefit from lots of fertilizer. It's an herb and more of like a wild type of plant, but if you can give it some extra nitrogen here and there, it's going to grow very lush for you. When it comes to pests and diseases, I really didn't get any with my plants, but you might get aphids because they do like to suck the juices out of this plant. If you get them, blast them off with a hard spray of water from your water hose, but I don't recommend that you spray some kind of treatment for the aphids because you're going to be eating the leaves. If it gets really bad and you have to treat for the aphids, then I recommend organic insecticidal soap. The plants are susceptible to things like powdery mildew, especially if you're in a high humidity area like me here in Florida. My plants really didn't get any, but if I did, I would spray with 1 cup hydrogen peroxide per gallon of water. Hopefully by following these tips, your Papalo plants will grow really big and you'll have lots of leaves to harvest. You can start harvesting off your plants whenever you decide, but I like to allow the plants to get a little bit big before I start plucking leaves off from them. If you need some, you just harvest as needed. In Mexico, they often place bunches of Papalo in vases on top of restaurant tables, so that way you can kind of serve yourself and add as much as you'd like to your food. Papalo leaves are best used fresh because they lose a lot of their flavor if you try to dry them. They're also not usually cooked with as well. Since Papalo has a very similar flavor to cilantro, it's great as a fresh garnish on top of tacos, mixed into raw salsas, or made into a sauce very similar to chimichurri. I hope you enjoyed my comprehensive guide on how to grow Papalo from seed all the way to harvest and that it inspired you to try growing this in your garden. If you have any questions or you just want to share your Papalo growing experiences or recipes with me, please comment below. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel, that way you don't miss any of my gardening tutorials. Thank you for watching and happy gardening.